Of course, Daryl's not here tonight, so we're going to try to do our best without Daryl. But if you want to go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 36, that's where we're going to be tonight. But as we get started, wait just a second to let everybody sit down or get in. But in just a second, we'll have Rodney lead us in our opening prayer tonight. So, if you don't mind, go ahead, Rodney.
Our most gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we come before you this evening thanking you for your love and kindness towards us, thanking you for your word, and for the fact that you care about us and that you love us as your people, and we ask that you'll help us to gain more knowledge of you in our study this evening and to be more appreciative of you and your power and what you can do in this world and for our lives as we study this account and life of Hezekiah, and help us to gain from it what you would have us to. Be with Danny as he presents your word and help him to do so in a way that is encouraging and in accordance with your will, that we can be built up in accordance with your will. All this we ask and say in Jesus' name.
Amen. Okay, so chapter 36 in verse 1 starts out this way, right? That in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. This section, when we get to chapter 36, it's all of a sudden very different than what we've been the last several weeks in Isaiah, right? As we've been going through the things, because it's been poetry, it's been prophecy, and all those kind of things that have been mixed up together in this book so far. That honestly, it's easy to get lost in, right? You know, all those pieces of prophecy and poetry. But the next four chapters, chapter 36, 37, 38, and 39, go into a narrative, and it's not an unfamiliar story to us, right? That we're talking about Hezekiah in this time. So it's interesting because it's a narrative. The other thing that's really interesting about this, and I didn't realize how many times this is in the Bible, but 3 different accounts that we see these events take place, right? So we're going to see the events we're going to talk tonight. The hope is, by the way, to look at chapters 36 and 37. But the same events get covered in 2 Kings 18 and 19. We looked at that when we were in the 1st and 2nd Kings class. Was that last year, by the way? Or was it farther than that? It feels like last year, but it may have been farther than that. But in 2 Chronicles 32 also covers some of these same events. And so one thing I think is interesting, I heard somebody say this. So what's our job when we're looking at Isaiah is to ask the question, why? On some of these things. You know, number one, why does God break from this huge section of prophecy and then stick this narrative in here, right? You know, why does that happen? Why does all of a sudden he's talking about Hezekiah and the invasion and Sennacherib against Jerusalem and those kind of things? And then why is it so important? Precious real estate, right, in the Bible, that this is a story that gets 3 times in the Scriptures. I think it's interesting to think about as we go along through here. And I will say, just kind of leading up to this, I've got a real distinct picture in my mind now of kind of what sort of the diagram of the Scriptures kind of look like as we've been covering. So Daryl has been talking about chapter 7 through like 35 through here, or 30, well, really 39, that is all about trust. Right? He's been talking about it and these things. And this is the way I picture it right now. My mom every year in the holidays has a string that she puts on in the hallway, and all the greeting cards that she gets from people go on this string in that hallway. And I picture it like that because on one side of it we've got the last narrative that we've been part of, which is King Ahaz in chapter 7. And if we're talking about that context of trust that Daryl's been talking about with us, how did Ahaz do?
Not great. Not too good.
He was terrible, right? There was no trust. in God and those things. And ever since then, in all the prophecy and all the poetry things, we're seeing these messages pop up over and over again that come into place. Where don't trust in your own strength, don't trust in your own might, don't trust in your own wisdom and what you're going to do with these kind of things. Your own wealth. You know, what you can do with your cunning and your wealth. Don't trust in those kind of things. And don't trust in your own relationships and political alliances and all this kind of stuff. And underlying all of this is trust in the Lord, because He's the only secure foundation, right? And then interspersed with all of these kind of things is the destruction and all the pain and grief that comes with if you reject God, if you don't trust Him in this way. And then all the rewards and things that come into play with that. So one of the things last time Daryl was kind of pointing out, chapter 34, what's that a picture of? It's this wilderness that will result in this destruction that results if you don't trust in the Lord. And then chapter 35 is all about this paradise, right? This garden that will be there if you do trust in God. So when we get to where we are right now for tonight, we introduce Hezekiah in chapters 36 through 39. And the real question is this, right? With all the message that Isaiah has been giving to the people, what are the people going to do? Specifically, what are the kings going to do? Are they going to trust in God, or are they going to put their trust in Egypt? Are they going to put their trust in other nations? Are they going to push their trust in their ability to negotiate with Assyria and all those kind of things that are there? Are they going to put their trust in idols and other gods and their own wisdom and all this kind of stuff? Or are they going to trust in God? One of the interesting things to me about this text and these things as we kind of look at this study is, you know, how do we think about Hezekiah, right? Hezekiah is a good king. There's a lot of things we point out and say he was a good one. And in fact, 2 Kings will say he trusted in the Lord. But he makes a lot of mistakes along the way when we're going through these kind of things. In the text we got tonight, Hezekiah is pushed, and he's going to make some mistakes along the way anyway. We'll see that. We see that in 2 Kings before these things kind of happen. But he's pushed to the point where he realizes the only place he's got, the only place he can put his trust in is God. And that's that picture that we look at tonight. Chapters 36 and 37, again, just kind of thinking big picture. 36 and 37, he's pushed to the brink. And he trusts in the Lord in this instance with the Assyrian army. Chapter 38, Lord willing, next week when Daryl's back, chapter 38, he's going to be faced with dire consequences again. He's ill and he's about to die, right? And God's going to deliver him for that when he puts his trust in the Lord. And then we're going to get to a real disappointing one, right? In chapter 39, where he has the opportunity to glorify God in front of the Babylonian king, and he doesn't do it, right? He doesn't keep that trust there. He trusts in himself. He glorifies himself in that. And right after that, and I think this is what's cool about Isaiah, is right there in chapter 39 we find out, you know what? This isn't the king that Isaiah's been talking about. He's not going to be the one that brings any of this kind of stuff about. And the rest of Isaiah we see, what is that kingdom really going to be like? What is that king really going to be like? What is salvation really going to look like? That's where all the servant songs and all these things kind of come into place. And it really shifts gears into that hope section, right? Judgment through verse 39, chapter 39, and then hope through the rest of Isaiah. So I think that's such a neat picture in some of those. So one more thing, just kind of introduction stuff that for tonight. In 2 Kings, if you look, the reason I had verse 13 up there for a minute in there is verse 13 is like the exact same verse as verse 1 in chapter 36. These are really parallel accounts. But 2 Kings does tell us a little bit more right before these things that happened. The Assyrian army, which by the way, this is about 701 now when we talk about the time. Anybody remember when Israel fell? by Assyria's hand? 722, yeah. So it's about 20 years later. The northern kingdom has fallen. All of these things are in place. We get to chapter 36 of Isaiah. The Assyrian king is approaching. He's taking all of these cities that are around Jerusalem, picking them off one by one. And he's approaching. Hezekiah sends messengers out. And he sends messengers out to the king of Assyria, and he basically says, I'll do anything. What do you want me to do? And Sennacherib sends an answer back and says, well, here's what I want. I'll lay off of you. I'll give you a rest if you give me 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah went into the king's house and into the house of the Lord, and he stripped all the gold and all the silver, and he took it out of the house of the Lord, and he sent it to the king of Assyria. He wasn't trusting in God right then. This is not very far along. Remember, verse 13 and verse 13 of 2 Kings 18, verse 1 of Isaiah chapter 36 is the same verse, same words that are in there. He wasn't trusting in God, even though he was considered a good king. He was doing all kinds of things, by the way, that we find out that were good things, taking down the high places, all this kind of stuff, but he didn't fully trust in the Lord right now in these things. And Sennacherib just says, thanks for the gold, thanks for the silver, I'm coming anyway. And that's when we open up into Isaiah chapter 36. Couple of, I guess said the last thing, one more thing. By this, but this is something that gets written about outside of just the Bible too, right? So these are some of the pillars. I've heard Rodney talk about these before. If I'll use Daryl's joke if anybody wants to read that, right? But Hezekiah talks about this, right? There's 3 different examples I think where you see some of this text where he talks about things in some of these events. He talks about how he had Hezekiah captured up in a cage. He doesn't get the rest of the chapter in some of this. He talks about how in the text we have, right now we talk about all the cities. Well, Sennacherib writes down that it was 46 cities. 46 fortified cities is what he took over, picked off one by one, right, as they're marching towards Jerusalem. And that's kind of that picture as we go in. All right, any comments before we kind of jump into the text? Any background or anything? I've talked too much already in some of this. Okay, let's jump in. Would somebody mind being a reader for the first 3 verses? Buddy, if you don't mind.
In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And the king of Assyria sent to Rabshakeh and from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. And there came out to him Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, and Shebna, the secretary, and Joah, the son of Asaph, the recorder.
Okay. All right, so there's a couple of really neat things, I think, even in these first 3 verses through this text. But I'll ask you what you guys think. But one of the things, I just want to put our minds in this. So I think we know the end of the story. It's hard to put ourselves in the beginning, at least it is for me, right, in the beginnings. But could you imagine, say Sennacherib was right in those writings. There's 46 cities that he went. Could you imagine being in Jerusalem and living there with your families, with your wives, with your kids, wife with your kids, those kind of things? And hearing about city number 1 in another city, maybe you hear about 2, and it's getting closer, and it's getting closer. And not only that, not just these cities that have fallen, but all the nations around. You've already been hearing about this for years, of what happened to this nation, what happened to that nation. They're making a circle around Israel. They're in the nation. They've already taken the northern kingdom, and city after city after city fall. I have a hard time putting myself in that situation, right? In what that would be like. The closest thing I think we could really think about is if you imagine, what would that be like here in this country? It's almost unimaginable, right? Where all the cities are taken, and the only city that's left in the United States is Washington, D.C. That's a crazy thing to think about. That's the situation that they're in when you see these things come into play. What did you guys see in this? Anything jump out to anybody? Go ahead, Rodney.
I think it's interesting that he was able to take all these other cities, because Hezekiah, when he became king, in Rabshakeh even mentions, you tore down all these altars, all these idols, all around. So it seems here you got Hezekiah who's a reformer, but the people aren't following. They're going along because that's the king, but God still let them all be taken.
Yeah.
By the Assyrians.
Yeah. This is the last city, not the first one, right? In this. Rodney mentioned Rabshakeh. I meant to look up how you actually pronounce that, by the way, before today. But Rabshakeh, in this. By the way, it's kind of a title, not necessarily his name, that's in there. But this is the general, right? This is the main guy. And did you notice how specific it was about? I think this is kind of cool. How specific it was about where he is. He's by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. I think that's interesting. Does anybody have their Bible open? Do you have your book with you, Rodney, right there? I didn't put this on the board, but if you look at chapter 7 and verse 3. I think it's verse 3. I hope it's verse 3. We'll see when you read it.
It says, then the Lord said to Isaiah, go out now and meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub, your son, at the end of the aqueduct from the upper pool on the highway to the fuller's field, and say to them, take heed and be quiet and do not fear. Be faint-hearted, for these two steps of smoke and firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin in Syria and the son of Remaliah.
And that's it. So this is the same place. And this is what I think is neat. Daryl's talked about these being bookends of trust. One generation ago, Ahaz in chapter 7, Isaiah was sent to this spot. Not like this spot, not a couple miles down the road. He was sent to this spot. And this is where Rabshakeh is standing and saying, who are you going to trust in? We have the example of Ahaz and what he did and what that meant and the judgment that was pronounced from chapter 8 through 12 and then all the things that follow with that. Now here's second chance for the nation. Same spot. I think that meant something to them. And I think that's a neat picture. And then, of course, we've got these three ambassadors. We'll see their names again. I don't have too much to say about them specifically, but these are the three that Hezekiah sends out to hear these things. Any other comments? Yeah, buddy.
Here's a big picture here also of shadow, because this whole time in their mind is, what do we have to do to be saved? Well, we've got to follow God. So what do we have to do to be saved? Well, we've got to go on God.
Yeah. So the answer is not hidden, right? But this is easier said than done. This is a big David and Goliath moment, right? In these things. 2 pages to read. Somebody mind being a reader for these 2 pages? Maybe Art, if you don't mind.
And the Rabshakeh said to them, say to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, on what do you rest this trust of yours? Do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? In whom do you now trust that you have rebelled against me? Behold, you are trusting in Egypt, that broken reed of a staff, which will pierce the hand of any man who leans on it. Such as Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar? Come now, make a wager with the master of Assyria, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you are able to, on your part, to set riders on them. How then can you repulse a single captain among the least of my master's servants when you trust in Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Moreover, it is without the Lord that I have come up against this land is it without the Lord that I have come up against this land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it.
Okay, depending on how you count, by the way, we're not all the way through it. I think there's probably 4 or so in here. He's going to give 5 or 6 arguments that Rabshakeh is going to give. And I've heard some people say, by the way, this is kind of the voice of the enemy. And you can make a lot of parallels today with these kind of things. But anything jump out to you guys as we were reading this?
He's instilling fear with his words.
Oh man, ever is he, right? Like he is. I can't imagine sitting on top of that wall and hearing this. We're going to read in a minute that he's talking in Hebrew, right? He's not speaking the language of diplomacy here. He's speaking to them, and they know what he's done. This wasn't a nice guy when he rolled into cities, right? In that way. Do you have something, Rodney?
Well, he's right about Egypt.
Yeah.
Just like what God said. Don't trust it.
Yeah.
You know, it's clear about that.
So there's one there's a book title I've seen before that really like the title of it. It's called like Greatest. There's 2 books out there. The greatest questions of the Old Testament, greatest questions of the New Testament. I think this is one of them, right? On what do you rest this trust of yours, right? On whom do you now trust? What a kind of spine-tingling kind of question to ask. It's right up there with Pharaoh. Who is this God that I should obey him? Those kind of things. Rodney talked about this first argument. Right, and I think this one's pretty straightforward in this sense. That how is Egypt like a broken reed?
It won't help you and it'll probably hurt you.
Yeah, you're going to lean on this stick. It's just going to go through your hand. That's Egypt. They're not trustworthy in this way, and for whatever reason they're not trustworthy, whether like by their actual trust or by that they can't deliver, whatever it is. He goes, it's not going to help you. It's going to hurt you if that's what you think things are going in. Reminds me of like Deuteronomy chapter 17, where he's talking about the kings, by the way. He's speaking to the kings, and God tells the kings of Israel, he said, do not acquire many horses for himself, speaking of the kings, and people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again, right? He called all these things out so many times in Deuteronomy. That's the only one I'll bring up from, maybe not the only one, but of a few I'll bring up from Deuteronomy. But all these things were called out so many years ago in these things. So that's the first argument. You're going to think you're going to rely on Egypt. It's not going to help you. And that's a pretty good argument. Argument number 2, I think is really interesting when he gets up here. When he says, but if you say to me, we trust in the Lord your God, is not he whose high places the altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar. This one has a couple layers to it. So what seems to be going on here in this statement? Yeah, buddy.
He doesn't understand that they were not high places and altars of God. They were to Baals and false gods. So he may not understand the religious system or even know of God that he's talking about.
So he knows a lot about what's going on. Did you notice that first, by the way? Rabshakeh, how did he know that? Like, this guy he's read The Art of War. He has studied his enemy, right? He knows that these high places exist, number one. He knows that Hezekiah has taken them down and said, you worship in this place. Same language, by the way, God uses in Deuteronomy. Last one, I promise, maybe. But the pagan nations, they serve the gods in all these high places and mountains underneath every tree. And God said, this is not how you're going to worship me. You're going to worship in the place, he didn't name it in Deuteronomy, but you're going to worship me in the place that I choose. And that's going to be a distinction and a badge of honor. And that's how, God says in Deuteronomy, that's how people will know that you're mine. So whose fault is it that Rabshakeh doesn't know that? I think so. Israel was worshiping in the high places. They were worshiping God, right? They were worshiping God. Whenever we get to Ezra and Nehemiah and the people come up that the Assyrians had planted in Assyria, and they come and they want to help Zerubbabel build the temple. Remember what they said in that instance? They came up to him and they said, we've been worshiping God. We've been worshiping God on this mountain ever since the days when the king of Assyria brought us over into this land. We've been worshiping in those high places there. We worship the same God. To the outside looking in, worshiping God looked like worshiping any other idol. So that's how Rabshakeh saw this. And doesn't that happen today? How does the world see how to worship God? They see it through God's people. And if you look at what people really think of in terms of how to worship God, they've got some misconceptions, right? In some of these things. But I think that's really interesting. Any other comments on that argument? Too late. We'll jump to the next one. You know, the argument of your own strength. He's really making fun of him here, right? So this is one. I will give you 2,000 horses if you're able to put, for your part, to put riders on them. If you put that in modern language, what would that be?
Give you 2,000 guns if you can get people to shoot.
Yeah, I think that one hand tied behind my back and you get help, right? It's still not gonna help you. Is this picture? This is nothing to me to fight this. My least guy, my lowest guy, can beat your whole army, right? Is kind of that picture that's on there. So that's argument 3, I think, right? That actually I forgot this. I think this is part of it. When Rabshakeh does this, you know how they thought about these things? You know what? The more high places I have, the more places of worship I have, it's almost like buying, I think, tickets on a raffle or something. You gave up all these raffle tickets on these high places where you could have had a better chance. Now your odds are down to one place. You're gonna put your trust in one little place. I think that's the way that Rabshakeh is looking at this, right? As they sort of collect gods. They never denied that another God existed, right? They just kept collecting and saying, well, this God's better, and all those kind of things. But we see the horses, that sort of taunting that happens there. And then the next argument here in verse 10, this one's interesting too, right? Moreover, is it without the Lord that I have come up against this land to destroy it? The Lord God said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. What do you think about that one? Yeah, Daniel?
I think it's either a lie, that he's telling to try to intimidate them, or it's perhaps true that God somehow directed him to do that. Because we've seen things like that happen in the Bible, right? Where God will use someone to either punish or destroy or to try to teach a lesson.
Yeah.
Or maybe even sometimes driving them to their own destruction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, Rodney, you have?
Well, later in Den's Sennacherib, it's not because necessarily coming against Jerusalem, it's because he says you're arrogant and you think you did it all yourself.
Yeah. And I think maybe even instead of after, even before, right? So I think he's actually lying there. But I think what's interesting about it is, I think it's true. God raised them up to punish the nations and to punish Israel. And he said so in the prophecy. So that's part true. But this piece, I think, is what makes me think that right now he's lying through his teeth. Right? Because he says in verse 6 of chapter 10, it said, against the godless nation I will send him, talking of Assyria, and against the people of my own wrath I will command him, right? Against my own people, against Jerusalem he's talking about. But look in verse 7. But he does not intend, and his heart does not think so. is the way it says in there. So I tend to, I don't know if it matters in the end, but I tend to think he's lying through his teeth right now, but there's a big old kernel of truth because God is the one that's really directing this. That's in there. So I think that's a neat kind of piece to this. All right, we won't read the rest of that. Let's look this is kind of the beginning of the next argument, kind of argument number 5, but we'll read this just as a little chunk because it's kind of an interesting back and forth with the ambassadors here. Somebody mind reading 11 and 12, just these 2 verses? Johnny?
Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah said to the Rabshakeh, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand it. Do not speak to us in the language of Judah within the hearing of the people who are on the wall. But the Rabshakeh said, has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not to the men sitting on the wall, who are doomed with you to eat their own dung and drink their own urine?
It's not very pleasant, right? But we get this picture. Speak to us in Aramaic. We don't want everybody to hear this, right? At the time, Aramaic is the language of diplomacy, right? It's what kings spoke. It's the reason why a bunch of Daniel, right? When we're talking about Babylon's written in Aramaic, all that kind of stuff. It's common language by the time we get to Christ in that kind of era in these things. But right now, it's not. And I think it's amazing, this guy, this general, the one that's sit there, he's the one that's saying these things, and he can speak Hebrew. The diplomats are there, but we really don't know that much about them. We really don't see them. They're hearing this. They're taking notes. They're writing it down. But I have a hard time imagining what it would have been like to hear all these arguments. Your family's not far away. It's your family that's behind the wall. And hearing things like this where he's talking about sieges and all that kind of stuff, saying you're doomed with you to eat your own dung and to drink your own urine. That's kind of the least of it, but it sounds terrible, right? Yeah, buddy.
You were talking about that kernel of truth, and this is full steam propaganda to try and get some of the people away, weaken the defenses, and that's
He can cash the check too, though. Like this happened 46 times, right? You know, back around through this.
in Japan, there was Tokyo Rose. You would speak English over the radio, just propaganda. You lost here, whether it's true or not. It was just, it gets in you,
Yeah.
and it affects you.
This is very purposeful, all these arguments he's doing. Yeah, for sure. John, would you mind reading the next 2 pages?
Then the Rabshakeh stood and called out in a loud voice in the language of Judah, hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace with me and come out to me. Then each one of you will eat of his own vine and each of his own fig tree, and each one of you will drink the water of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to the land like your own land, a land of grain and wine and a land of bread and vineyards.
What's this argument that he's making?
You'll come to me, I'll make it easy on you. You won't have to suffer. You won't have to worry about, the wrath that's about to be handed down to your country, your city.
It's not going to be that bad. Do you want to eat your own dung and drink your own urine? You know what they did, the cities? The soldiers had license to do whatever they wanted to and to make examples of things. Men and boys were killed. Women were taken advantage of. If you're lucky, you get the fish hooks, right? You're being led away for those kind of things. Babies and kids were dashed on rocks. Because whenever there was a city that didn't bow down to them, they made an example of them so that all the cities would know. and that people would just give up when they showed up. Assyria invented this stuff. And they had to transplant people to other lands, and the reason they would do that, mix up languages and mix up peoples, and the whole idea was there wouldn't be enough of you to raise a revolt. And you're sitting there hearing about that stuff and thinking about it with your families behind the wall, and then he goes, it won't be that bad, you just have to move. If you really put yourself in that place, does it really feel like that much of a compromise? I have a hard time putting myself in that place. Make your peace with me. That's a dangerous statement. Talk about the voice of the enemy. I mean, we hear that today. Make your peace with me. It won't be that bad, this sin, this thing. It won't be that bad. It'll be just like it is, just a little different. Yeah, Rodney? Until.
Yeah, until I take you away. Yeah, that's the hook.
And you think about this phrase, I mean, it should sound familiar to us. His own vine, and each his own fig tree, and each his own drink of water. That's what God was promising. Deuteronomy talks about that. Maybe last one. But Deuteronomy talks about that. You're going to have your own vine and your fig tree, and you're not even going to plant it. But that's what God's giving to you. When we look at Solomon, in the times of Solomon in 1 Kings, when you get there in chapter 4 or so in there, you know what it says? And every man had his own fig tree and his own cistern, and it was there. Now here's somebody that's not God promising that. I can give you the same things. Just a little different. That's the argument that he's making here. A land like your own. Just a little different in those things. We're not at chapter 37 yet. Let's move on. Somebody mind reading 18 through 20? Ken, if you don't mind.
The word is as a kind as lead you saying, Lord will deliver us. As any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hands of the king of Assyria. Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? They have delivered Samaria out of my hands. Who among all the gods of these lands have delivered their lands out of my hands? And the Lord shall deliver Jerusalem.
Last argument, I call this argument number 6 in here. They kind of morph into each other, right? But I've got the track record. You don't want I know that all these things are true and that it's better, or that I know you're going to eat your own dung and all that kind of stuff. Because it happened to Hamath, it happened to Arpad, it happened to Zerzim, it happened to them all. And you're just another one. You're just another one in these things. And who among all those gods, they all said they had their own gods, they all fell. You're just like one of those other nations. Your God is just like one of those gods. Is that picture? I won't spend too much time on this one, kind of an interlude between to getting into chapter 37. But Hezekiah had them, don't say anything. When he delivers this message, don't say a word. Bring it back to me. They didn't say those things. So all three of them, they come back to Hezekiah. They tear their clothes. And then we get to Hezekiah in chapter 37. I didn't realize it really before, but all of chapter 36, he's not there. Really, all of this is just that announcement in some of those things. Let's go ahead and read 1 through 4 in chapter 37. Somebody mind being a reader here? Leah, if you don't mind.
As soon as King Hezekiah heard it, he tore his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. And he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebna the secretary, and the senior priests, covered with sackcloth to the prophet Isaiah the son of Amos. And they said to him, Thus says Hezekiah, this day is a day of distress, of rebuke, and of disgrace. Children have come to the point of birth, and there's no strength to bring them forth. It may
Okay, couple interesting things here, right? And as you're gathering thoughts and those kind of things, verse 1, Hezekiah does 3 things, right? He tears his clothes. There's mournfulness in this one, right? There's sorrow in these things. You think Hezekiah wasn't thinking about the fact that he stripped down the temple when these things happen? He covers himself in sackcloth, right? This was humility that's being shown in some of these things. And he went to the house of the Lord. Same place that he had taken all this gold out of. But he goes mournful, humble, broken. He goes to God in these things. I think this verse is interesting through here. It says, when he's talking about this, children has come to the point of birth, but there is no strength to bring them forth. What do you think that means? Any thoughts about that verse?
More than likely that they already been under siege for some time.
Yeah. I think they're emptied of everything that they can do. What do they need when they've come to this far? They need deliverance. This baby needs to get delivered, but they don't have any way to do it. There's nothing they can do to make this happen, is this picture. And Hezekiah realizes that for the first time. He believed in God always. He was taking down high places, all this kind of stuff. He was a good king. Now he's trusting in God. But you notice, I don't know if I highlighted this one, but you notice what he appeals to, by the way? He doesn't say, because I need it, because I deserve it, all these kind of things, because they're mocking the living God. And I do think it's interesting, this first time, he asks Isaiah to pray for him. He asks Isaiah to pray for him. Okay, let's move on. Verse 5 through, is this 2 pages?
Hey, Danny.
Yeah, John.
Real quick. Go back.
Art's head's blocking it, by the way. I keep missing your hand.
We're saying, it says a few times, the Lord your God. To me, it's kind of, why isn't it not our God?
He's getting there.
It's always, it's always the Lord your God at this point.
So Hezekiah is getting there. He's saying that right now. And I'm not sure if it's kind of out of humility that he hasn't done everything that he should do. But he changes a little bit towards the end of this chapter, right? And some of that. That's a good point.
And
Yeah.
I thought about that too when I read this, but I think he's just at the point where he doesn't feel worthy of calling God his God, that he's so humble and low, knowing how bad he's messed up.
Yeah.
You know, and that he's erred. I'm not worthy for you to even call me your child at this point. I need to get there, which I agree with you. That's what he's doing.
Yeah. Very true. So Isaiah comes out. We won't necessarily read this one because we got to read a few that are coming there. But he comes out, and I'll go to. Okay. He comes out, and Isaiah says Sennacherib's going to hear a rumor, and he's going to go away. Apparently, Hezekiah doesn't quite believe some of these things here, but this stuff starts to come in, pass. He hears that rumor, and we get one more mock, one more taunt that comes in chapter 37 from Rabshakeh saying, don't think that this is going to get you off the hook, right? I'm still here, and I'm still coming after Isaiah had prayed in these things. So he gives that second taunt that comes into place. And then this is the point where we see Hezekiah, and let's start reading. I'll read this one. Isaiah 37, verse 14 through 20. And Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went to the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, O Lord of hosts of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone. And all the kingdoms of the earth that you have made, heaven and earth, incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. And hear all the words that Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations of their lands and have cast their gods into the fire. For they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they were destroyed. So now, O Lord our God, save us from this hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. I don't know about you guys. Sometimes when we sing songs, I get a couple pictures in my head. But this picture, you know, we sing that song, Lord, I lay my life at your feet. I think about Hezekiah when we sing that song. And again, you notice how he appeals to God for his greatness. And he says, it's because of your name. And you think about all the times that Moses intervened for the people, all the times that happened, every single time when Moses intervened for the people, he said, it's because of your name. Why does God say that he did the plagues in Egypt? So that all the nations will know that he is the God. And God answers him through Isaiah and says, you know what? That's it, Hezekiah. Because you have prayed to me, I'm going to do these things. And he calls Israel, he calls them, and he gives this prophecy that's in here. She despises you and scorns you, your virgin daughter of Zion, wags her head behind you, daughter of Jerusalem. Jerusalem's going to be this virgin daughter, this untouched virgin by the Assyrians, because they're not going to have to lift their finger. They're never going to lift a sword. Because who have they thought they've been mocking? They thought they've been mocking this people, but they've been mocking the living God. God has been the one, verse 26, that has planned this from the days of old, right? From long ago. And planned these from the days of old and bring these things to pass. They had no idea that God was doing these things. I know Sennacherib, right? God speaking again, when you're sitting down, when you're going out, and when you're coming in. I'll put a hook in your nose, is this pronouncement that he's doing. I will do this. Why? Well, city, I'll save it for my own namesake. God said that's why he's doing this, not for these people that are in here. And the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the people rose early in the morning, and behold, all dead bodies. These were all dead bodies. I can't imagine what that looked like, right, in these things. And then we get this picture where the king of Assyria, later he goes back home, he's in Nineveh, he's in the house of his God, and his sons kill him. His sons slay him. In this story, two people went to the house of their gods. Hezekiah went mournful with sackcloth and ashes and prayed to God, and 185,000 people were destroyed, saving the nation of Judah. When Sennacherib, the most powerful man in the world, arguably at the time, went into the temple of his God, God could touch him there. And he could kill him in the worst way possible, to be killed by your own sons. Is that picture? Anything else? We went over just a little bit. Buddy, you got just a real quick one?
Just real quick, this is in the New Testament, and the disciples are from Jesus, and they say, well, who then can be saved?
Yeah.
Well, with man, it's impossible. With God,
Yeah. So thanks again, guys.